Hi guys, welcome back to Turn Your Lights On. This week's case was one that has been recommended to me by quite a few people, but before I hop in, I do want to give a disclaimer that this case is still an active investigation. It is still unsolved, but I do want to do my best to provide you guys with the proper information. Seeing as this case is still open for investigation, please understand that I'm providing you guys with the evidence that I have been presented with, and none of this has any relation to my opinion on the investigation. And remember that again, because this case is still open, that everyone is innocent until there is reasonable evidence and they're proven guilty in court. With that being said, I do want to hop right in. This case is pretty unsettling, so you may want to turn your lights on. Rogersville, Tennessee has a population of approximately 15,000 people and is known to be very archaic due to the fact that it is one of the state's oldest towns. It was founded in 1775. Rogersville is also known to be home to many of Tennessee's firsts, such as the first newspaper, courthouse, and post office. Rogersville is part of the Appalachian Mountains and has a surprisingly high crime rate of approximately 45.57 per 1,000 people, and a rating score of 51 according to Nextdoor.com. Also, according to Nextdoor.com, despite these statistics, locals on Nextdoor Neighbors consider Rogersville a safe place to live, although concerns about missing children in the area have been expressed, which is exactly what happened in today's case. Summer was just 5 years old at the time of her disappearance. She was the sister of 3 older brothers and the daughter of Don and Candace. The Rogersville area was a very rural and secluded area, so the family had a rather large property. On June 15th, 2021, around 6:30 p.m. in Rogersville, Tennessee, 5-year-old Summer Wells disappeared from her home. Now, just as a little more background knowledge, the family that lived on this property consisted of Candace, Dawn, Josie, Waylon, Wyatt, and Summer in the main house, and across the driveway in a trailer on the property, Candace's mother, also named Candace, lived there. And for the remainder of this case, I'm going to refer to Summer's grandmother, Candace, as Grandma, and her mother as Candace, so that there's no confusion. And I just want to give this little PSA so that there's no confusion going forward. Now back to the timeline of this case. According to her mother, Candace, Summer was last seen wearing a pink top and gray sweatpants. However, there have been different reports stating that she was actually wearing gray shorts. These two arguing statements came up quite a few times during my research, so I just wanted to make that known. Summer's mother had claimed that before her daughter had gone missing, the two were outside gardening together. When Summer got tired, her mother sent her inside to be watched by her brothers. However, when Candace was finished in her garden, she returned back to the house, and she discovered that Summer was missing, and her 3 brothers stated that she went downstairs in their basement to play with her toys. Allegedly, Summer shared the basement with her parents. One side of the basement had a bedroom for Summer and her one brother Waylon, and then the other side was her parents' room, so it makes sense if most of her toys were down there anyway. Unfortunately, when Candace went looking for Summer, she was no longer in the basement. At first, Candace thought nothing of this, because there was a door that led to the outside of their basement, and it was apparently typical behavior for Summer to go out that door to the swing in the front of their house, so she would go out the door in the back and then come up through the front yard by the swing, and she would play on the swing. Although I'm uncertain of how typical this was, because it was stated by Allie, one of Candace's close friends and Hunter's mom, who we will get into later in this case, that the basement door was always locked. And up until a short amount of time before Summer's disappearance, that door had actually been barricaded off by a couch so that it wasn't accessible to the children. So again, I'm not exactly certain of how long she'd been doing this for. However, after circling the house to the front, Candace still could not find Summer. Allegedly, there was only about a 2 to 5 minute window where Candace was outside alone before coming in to check on her. So there was a very small time frame where Summer could have gone missing. Candace's fears grew quickly. Her first instinct was to call her husband Don at work to let him know and ask him to come home. Don worked about 45 minutes from their house, and of course he left work immediately and advised Candace to call the police, and he called the police as well. Many of my sources differ as to what time the police had been called, but it was somewhere between 3 and 6 p.m. Now this is where I noticed yet another discrepancy during my research. According to my sources, Don claimed he made it home before the police had arrived on scene, but in a released audio of the 911 dispatcher communication, it stated that Summer had only been gone for about 10 minutes and that police responded immediately to the call. So I'm unsure as to who actually arrived first on scene, and a lot of my resources talk about their speculation as to this point as well. But at this point in the episode, I do want to take a break in the timeline to throw some facts out at you guys that I think are important to what we've discussed in the time frame so far. Some of these facts pertain to theories that people have come to after hearing this evidence, so I'm going to try my best to distinguish the difference between theories and facts for you guys. Candace was good friends with a woman in the area named Allison, or Allie, and Allie's son, 15-year-old Hunter, was especially close to the Wells family and even considered Summer to be a younger sister to him. Hunter played a big part in giving authorities information on the hours prior to Summer's disappearance. Hunter told authorities and TBI, otherwise known as the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, that around 10 a.m. that day of Summer's disappearance, he had joined Candace, Grandma, and Summer to run some errands. He also told TBI that the 3 Wells boys had gone to work with their father Don that day. However, this is something that he was told and didn't witness, and this information was never actually confirmed by authorities because there were some holes in the story when hearing this information from Candace and her husband. So they were not entirely sure as to whether or not the boys were left home all day or if they had gone to work with their father. Anyway, Hunter says that their first stop was to bring Grandma to the hospital to get her knee checked out. Apparently she had some knee issues. Once Grandma was done at the hospital, their next stop was to get her prescription filled. Hunter claims that the store pharmacist had told them that it would take about 35 minutes to fill this prescription. And their next stop was to get a can of Twisted Tea and 2 Puff Bars, which are nicotine vapes. After this, Candace decided to take Summer and Hunter to a local watering hole at Warriors Path State Park. This watering hole was also referred to as Horse Pond. However, Horse Pond was about 20 minutes from where Grandma's prescription was being filled, so they only went for a quick dip before heading back. Hunter also made it known that there was a point in time where Summer was the only one swimming in the water and everyone else was by the car. He says he remembers talking to Candace, watching TikToks, and drinking the can of Twisted Tea that Candace had given to him, while also sharing Candace's Puff Bar at just 15 years old. When Hunter turned around to check on Summer, she was fully submerged under the water. Nobody knew exactly how long Summer had been under the water, so instinctively he rushed over to check on her. However, Summer seemed inherently fine and laughing, but Hunter did say that he believes she had been breathing in the water. At this point, they left Horse Pond and headed back to get Grandma's prescription. Before they made it to Walgreens, Candace and Grandma had decided they wanted to make a quick pit stop into another tobacco shop that had just recently opened called the Hippie House. Hunter was obviously too young to go in, so he stayed back with Summer in the car. He recalls Summer still being seemingly fine at this point and eager to stay back and watch TikToks with him while her grandma and mom entered the store. After Candace and Grandma finished up at Hippie House, they made their way to Walgreens. At this point in time, Hunter states that he was sitting in the middle seat in the back and Summer was behind the passenger seat, sitting on top of a pillow because she was still wet from swimming. This was originally confirmed by Candace in an interview, However, in a later interview, Candace stated that she had actually changed Summer at the watering hole after she had gone swimming so she wasn't in the car wet. So once again, two very different allegations. Once they had picked up Grandma's prescription, the four stopped at Sonic to pick up slushies to cool themselves down from the hot day and heading to their next stop, which was a grocery store called Priceless. Now, once again, we're going to see two opposing statements, one from Hunter and one from Candace. Hunter says that Candace and Grandma had headed into the store together and were shopping for about an hour, leaving Hunter to again watch after their young daughter. However, Candace claimed that Grandma stayed in the car with Hunter and Summer while she quickly ran in because she only needed a few things. Regardless of this discrepancy, when Candace had returned to the car, her and Hunter loaded the groceries into the bed of the truck. Hunter claims that he and Summer, however, held on to the milk during the drive because he didn't want to clean up the milk if it were to spill and make a mess. Their next stop was to head to Allison's house to drop Hunter back at home around 2:30 p.m. that day. During this ride, it seems as though Summer had fallen asleep and was now leaning on the milk jugs that were propped up between her and Hunter. Upon returning Hunter to his house, Allison claimed that she went out to say hi to Summer like she always did, but for some reason Candace was making a fuss about not waking Summer. And this was super unusual to Allie because she would always wake Summer to talk to her. I believe it was also around this point when Candace took the last picture she would ever take of Summer to this day. In this picture, people have speculated that Summer seemed quite pale, and I think it brought a lot of thoughts of the possibility that maybe she had what they call dry drowned. This means that water has been sitting in the lungs for some time and eventually causes someone to drown. However, this is just a theory and not a proven fact. Now, I'm not entirely sure where this falls into the timeline that Hunter had given TBI and Chris McDonough, who is a retired homicide detective and now podcast owner. But Hunter did claim that while he, Candace, Grandma, and Summer had been out for the day, Dawn had called and asked when they were returning. This was because Dawn allegedly had seen a man in the area who would tend to lurk around small children. Once again, this statement raised some suspicion because how would Dawn know this if he was at work with the boys all day? However, it was at this time that Candace, Grandma, and Summer headed home, put the groceries away, and headed outside to do some gardening. And this is where we return to the timeline of the case. Authorities and citizens of the area conducted a search for Summer. There was an approximate range of people of about 60 to 80 during this search. Police took this search very seriously by using forms of technology so they could search by land, air, and water. This is super awesome because in missing people's cases, the first 72 hours are the most important. This is so evidence can be preserved still during this time. The missing person could obviously be in danger, especially in a case with a young child such as Summer. Authorities working to understand to what extent they should be searching, if there's maybe a suspect, or if there's specific places they should be searching in, and making sure they can spread the word properly so they can hopefully get an abundance of media coverage for the case. This search went on for around 24 hours, but this brought up the question that if Summer had ventured off on her own, how could she have gone this far out of reach of those who were searching for her? An Amber Alert was sent out in hopes that someone would see it and have any insight as to where Summer could be. Authorities also released a statement saying that nothing and no one is out of the question yet, and that they will be working any and all possible theories in order to get to the bottom of this case. After the first week of investigation, over 4 miles of area had been searched, and still no Summer. Authorities then released a statement reminding everyone helping with the conducted search that this is a 5-year-old girl that has gone missing, so it was important that they look in even the smallest places that an adult would not fit in. Her family continued to do interviews in hopes to bring light to their situation and hoped that it would give them any leads as to where their daughter was. All the family received, though, was an extensive amount of criticism. Many people were pointing fingers and accusing both Dawn and Candace of being responsible for the disappearance of their daughter. These online attacks grew so aggressive that they began to happen in person as well. Dawn claims there had been times where people would show up to their house at night making these accusations to the point where their family felt unsafe in their own home. There was even a point in time where Dawn told an interviewer that he had to shoot the air above a man's head to scare him off because he wouldn't leave their property. Weeks, then months, and even years went by and still no sign of Summer. Upon the disappearance of their daughter, a CPS case was opened against the Wells to ensure the safety of their other 3 children. I believe this case was shut, but I'm not entirely sure it didn't remain open and stayed dormant. I don't want to give any false information, so I'm not going to say 100% for sure. I did want to include this though because it is important to the remainder of the case. Unfortunately, the disappearance of Summer put a lot of stress on her father, and it led him to abuse alcohol. Dawn reacted harshly to the situation one night and was arrested for a DUI. This arrest led to the Tennessee Department of Child Services to take custody of the 3 Wells boys. This happened only 1 month after the disappearance of their daughter. And eventually, Dawn and Candace gave up full custody to their 3 sons. Dawn claimed in an interview that neither he or his wife had heard from their sons since giving them up for custody. He believes that they have since blocked his number. This DUI was not the only arrest that Dawn had on his record. The October before Summer had gone missing, her father was arrested on the account of domestic charges. This claim was filed against Dawn by his own wife, Candace. Candace had claimed she feared not only for her safety, but her children's safety as well. However, these accusations were dropped shortly before Summer's disappearance. Dawn Wells had also pleaded guilty in April of that year to a gun charge. According to Johnson City Press, Wells also acknowledged Tuesday that his 34-year-old son, Donald Wesley Wells, is a convicted sex offender, having pleaded guilty in Arkansas in 2007 to sexual indecency with a child. Upon learning this information, many people have been skeptical at the fact that Dawn's first instinct would be to call the police when he had just been arrested numerous times within the past year. I think this skepticism is very 50-50 though, because if your child is missing, you're going to do everything in your power to find them. But I do see the other side of things where people believe that he would want to handle the situation without the presence of police. Dawn wasn't the only one who had a criminal record though. Candace did as well. Allegedly, when Candace was only 19 years old, she married 42-year-old Andrew and had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. The girl named Candace after her, and the boy named after her husband at the time, Andrew. However, Candace and her husband Andrew were both arrested and charged with domestic assault, and their children were taken from them. Candace's daughter in her adult age goes by the name Candace Floden, and she has since made a claim about her mother stating, "I was adopted at 6 months, put back into foster care around the age of 12 with my brother, same name as my bio father. I was told my bio mom was a meth head and abused us as babies. She has a record. Not sure if she has one where she is now, Tennessee, but she has one or a few in Wisconsin for sure." As of today, Summer Wells has been missing for a little over 4 years. Now, there has been an alleged breakthrough in the case because of a recent tip made to TBI, but it has not been verified by authorities. TBI has made it known in previous interviews that if there was any news or suspects, that they would make it known. So I am sure that if this tip is legit, they will be sharing the information shortly. I'm not 100% certain on this next fact because it was only made by a few of my sources, and most of the facts that I've provided have been made known in almost, if not all of my sources, but I do believe that TBI is working on updating Summer's progression picture as well so they can make new flyers for her. TBI has also asked in the past that any and all tips being made to authorities be accurate and serious. This is because at the time of Summer's disappearance, they had received almost 800 tips, and many of those were people who had theories of what happened to Summer after researching her case. They had no evidence or grounds and were deemed detrimental to the advancements of the case. They had no evidence or grounds and were deemed detrimental to the advancements of the case. With that being said, I would like to encourage anyone who has proper information about this case to contact 1-800-TBI-FIND, email tipstotbi@tn.gov, or if you are 100% certain that you have seen Summer Wells, I urge you to call authorities. Now, I want to get into some theories as to what people have speculated to have happened to Summer. I want to read some of these theories to you guys because they do include more than just speculation, but some of them do bring light to some more facts that I haven't shared with you guys yet. Of course, theory number one that many and most discuss is that Summer's parents were actually the ones responsible for her disappearance. There are many conspiracies as to why this is true, but I'm going to kind of loop them all together and not spend too much time on the accusations, but instead focus on the facts. Some think that Summer had dry drowned and her family tried to cover her death by burying her body somewhere on the property. Some believe that Don Wells had harmed their daughter due to the claims that his wife had made in a recent police report about fearing for herself and her children. Skeptics claimed that her parents didn't directly know what happened to their daughter, but knew who took her. And some even went as far as to say they believed Donald even tried to sell his daughter for drug money. According to no2abuse.com, at this point, Don Wells states that the TBI/FBI accused him of selling his daughter for dope. So he took $2,000 from his bank account and went to Knoxville and bought $2,000 worth of effing shit. I effing gave dope away all night for 2 days. I had 5 or 6 agents following me for 2 days. Then I got on the freeway and went home. They was on the freeway with me and I outran them all except for one car. I showed them I don't need to sell my effing daughter to buy dope. I got plenty of money in my bank account. Don Wells makes 5 interesting admissions here. Firstly, that he was being followed by law enforcement agents. Secondly, that he attempted to lose the law enforcement agents tailing him. Thirdly, that he withdrew $2,000 from his bank account. And fourthly, that he then drove to Knoxville and spent 2 days there. The interesting 5th admission is that the TBI/FBI have actually accused Don Wells of selling Summer Wells for drugs. This bizarre road trip to Knoxville is an extraordinary reaction to the accusation by law enforcement. Another fact that I wanted to share that could possibly contribute to one of these theories is that when Dawn and Candace went on the Dr. Phil show, body language experts Scott Roos and Greg Hartley noticed some noteworthy things during their interview. Firstly, they kept reverting back to the fact that Candace stormed off because she felt she was being interrogated and that the interview wasn't helping her. They claimed that this ideal didn't align with a concerned mother who desperately wanted her daughter back, but she was in fact more worried about herself at that moment. The next noteworthy piece of evidence that they gathered was that Candace seemed very checked out. She would often pause before answering questions, close her eyes, take deep breaths, and even sat in a way that made her seem very checked out of the conversation. The final noteworthy thing that I thought was crucial to this case was that allegedly there was a mafia group called the Cornbread Mafia close by to the family's home. And when Scott and Greg had mentioned the name of the mafia, they noticed instantly that Candace's face changed and her emotions became very much more real. However, the couple denied any relation to the group. Not long after this question, Candace claimed she felt she was being interrogated and left the interview immediately. Now, Candace claims she left the show because they received news that they may have had groundbreaking information in the case, but it turned out that this was just a mix-up. Candace stated that this mix-up caused her to feel the same way she felt on the day that Summer went missing. It felt like losing her daughter all over again. Some also found irony behind the fact that the family's first thought was that Summer went out the basement door and to the front, because they stated that she wasn't the type to run off, seeing as though they told her so many horror stories of the animals that lurked in the woods. And because they had just recently moved to the couch that barricaded the door so that the children couldn't reach the lock. It has also been brought up in some of my sources that there was never 100% proof that Dawn had gone to work that day because, for some reason, Dawn, Candace, and Grandma's records for those few hours had somehow been deleted. Another theory is that someone who knew the family quite well, or even the creepy man that Dawn had seen the day of Summer's disappearance, had taken her. The family lived on a hill and had acres upon acres of property that was filled with lots of foliage at the time Summer disappeared. It was said to be very unlikely that a stranger had even known that there was a house up there, and if they did, surely the Wells would have seen them before they saw Summer. The final theory that I want to discuss before ending the topic of accusations is that the person responsible for Summer's disappearance is the same person who had taken Candace's aunt years prior. Rosemary Bly was a 21-year-old mother of 2 children under the age of 2 and a loving wife to Christopher Larson. On August 21st, 2009, Rose left her home telling her husband that she was meeting her cousin at the bar. Rose never returned home again. Just 4 days after her disappearance, her car had been located, but Rose was nowhere in sight. It was later stated that the cousin she was supposedly meeting never had plans with Rose that night in the first place. So now Candace has 2 relatives that have gone missing with no sight of when their cases will end, or when those 2 unsuspecting girls will get the closure they deserve. Before I finish off this episode, I just wanted to say in cases like these, I feel as though discrepancies are bound to happen because everyone is in such a frantic fight or flight state of mind when someone goes missing. But I did want to make them known just so you guys could have an accurate depiction of the information that is available. I also wanted to provide you guys with as much information while also being as unbiased as I could be because, again, this is still an open case. And anything I would have to say about it would be based off of any information that is currently released. However, there is a possibility that all information that is made public is not all that is known about the case, because if Summer has been kidnapped, it may be better to keep any suspects not in the public eye to help ensure Summer's safety. There is also a lot of speculation on social media as to what may have happened to Summer. So I would love to hear your guys' opinions as to what you think may have happened based on the evidence that I've given to you in this. So you can leave a comment below and I would love to read these comments and see what you guys think about what happened to Summer. However, I do ask that you remain respectful to the Wells family no matter your opinion. I do hope that Summer is of course found and okay. I do also hope that she and her family are brought to justice. This is one of those cases where there's so much he said, she said, and discrepancies within the case. And there are a lot of nitty-gritty details about this case as well that I didn't get into because we would be here for hours. But just to give you guys some background on just how nitty-gritty these details are, some of my sources go into detail about the size of the Twisted Tea can Candace gave Hunter or the color of the vape she had purchased that day. And to those who constructed those interviews, I give you a ton of credit for being so thorough with your investigation. But for now, that is all I have for you guys. This is the unsolved and still active case of Summer Wells. Thank you guys for tuning into this week's episode. If you're on Spotify, if you could leave a comment, follow, and rate the podcast, I would really appreciate it. And if you're on YouTube, comment, subscribe, or leave a like. And follow Turn Your Lights on social media platforms such as TikTok or Instagram. I would be super grateful. Every week we will learn about a new true crime case. Some of these cases get a little intense, so you may want to turn your lights on.